All right, this is Project Herpetoculture Podcast, episode 47. I'm your host, Roy Arthur Blodgett, joined by Mr. Philip Leitz of Arids Only, as always. And we've got a great show today. We're going to do some recapping, a bit of a solo show. But before we do, I want to acknowledge our sponsors. So we have Custom Reptile Habitats. They're makers of premium PVC reptile enclosures. And we have an affiliate link for them posted in our description and bio. If you make a purchase through that link, we will receive a small commission at no additional cost to you. And that really helps us out. We also have Cold-Blooded Caffeine, and they're roasters of premium coffee that donate a small percentage from each bag of coffee sold to conservation in coffee growing regions. We have a discount code, Project Herp, for 10% off. And check them out. They make delicious coffee. And then lastly, we have Redline Shipping for all your reptile shipping needs. Check them out for your labels and supplies. I also want to give a shout out to Dylan and the Animals at Home Network for hosting us as always.
The GOAT.
And to Charlie. Yeah. And to Charlie for keeping us on the tracks, editing our audio, and helping to keep this intelligible for our listeners as best we can with our antiquated audio equipment. So with all of that out of the way, I'm going to pass it over to Phil to get the ball rolling.
All right. What's up? So thanks, Roy. I think I kind of want to start by saying a couple of things. The first is I've been thinking a lot lately about how lucky we are to be able to even do this and to be able to even put the show together. And the fact that we have so many people, the fact that we have sponsors to this day blows my mind. You know what I mean? I mean, that part's pretty damn wild. But also the fact that we have the support of Dylan and the support of Charlie to sit and edit our audio for us and make it so this thing doesn't look like a jumbled piece of garbage like it sometimes can, I'm sure. So, I mean, that feels really good. I know one of the things we wanted to talk about today, because I think this came up in our conversation with Mariah, didn't it? The sort of disaster preparation and power outage prep and stuff and things like this. And, briefly. I think it's a really good thing to sort of touch base on, because we have a here in Colorado. I have to be certified by PACFA, which is a Pet and Animal Care Facilities Act, or I sometimes mess up that acronym, but and one of the things that I have to have to be in accordance with all their regulations and whatnot is I have to have a contingency plan. So I just have a Google Doc on which I write up all the, and I modify it all the time, either if something changes about the way I'm keeping things together here, or if I decide I'm going to try a new, piece of, a new kind of interference on a specific problem, or if, say if I were to upgrade my, my heating system or something, something like that, something about my contingency plan would change. But for the most, or if I think of a new natural disaster, one that I never thought of, what would I do if a mudslide hit the shop? It's not really a problem here, but you know what I'm saying? It's just sort of something that'll pop into my mind and I'll be like, all right, hey, it's time to do this. And I know it's kind of fun because on the one hand, it's the kind of thing that you really hope you never have to actually execute. You're like, man, God, when you actually sit down and spend time, going through the motions about what would you do in the event that a tornado hit or a severe flooding event or some crazy, for me, the primary thing that I'm always thinking about is power outage during a snowstorm. That's the primary thing here. That's the biggest worry for me. I guess fire could happen too, but it's pretty rare in this part of the state. Just doesn't really get fires in the same way. Because there's probably not enough vegetation around. Anyway, so I have all kinds of bizarre things that I have in my head, whether it's, or I mean, not in my head rather, but in that contingency plan, whether it's, okay, I have alarms in place in the event that anything happens here at the shop and the power goes out. So I get notified of power outages, right? Then I have a timer that basically starts. Like sometimes power outages just happen, and small ones are not a big deal. If it's out for 30 minutes, an hour, even in the middle of winter, that's not a big deal. It's not the end of the world. It's going to take, it's going to take a little while for the temperature to drop in this space sufficiently for it to be a problem. Right. But then if the power doesn't go on, before that, or after, until, if that timer runs out and the power is still not on, I have to go into action, because I can't assume that everything's going to be just fine. I have to sort of operate from the worst case scenario mindset, because there's so many animals here. The risk is so great that it's, you can't really afford any kind of possible slip in or lapse of judgment or preparation. So, I have like one plan set in place where it's like, okay, the power goes out and it's past that time. Sorry, I got like a little dry spot in my throat. Then I have a set of large bins that I have in the storage space up above the office that are insulated bins, styrofoam insulated bins, like basically just big coolers that you get from, like Walmart or whatever. And I have a whole mess of snake bags that I would just simply go through, bag every single animal, put them in the coolers, get them in my car, and then turn the heater on. Right. Unless, or wherever it is, right. If I have to take them somewhere, I can take them to my home and they can stay there for several days. If the worst case scenario happens, but it's sort of like an evolving document. And then I think it's not even, there's all kinds of things you need to have contingency for, right? Like so I know that this is a little bit near and dear to your heart at the moment, Roy, because of the power outage topic, because this just happened to you. And I'll definitely give you the space to chat about that. But there's other things too. One is that I think about all the time is like, what happens when you get pests in your space? So I get mice in here all the time, right? And it might not seem like a big deal, but mice are a problem, right? Because they're either going to eat through the food containers that you have set out, to feed the animals, because you're storing food all the time. They're gonna get into the enclosures, potentially spread some kind of disease in there. I mean, it's not a high likelihood, but it's a possibility. It's something you gotta consider. I think quarantine is sort of a contingency plan in some regard, like ensuring that you don't bring animals in to your space that are going to bring pathogens or some kind of problem in for you to deal with. I'll be straight up and upfront about it here and now. I just recently had a mite outbreak here at my place, and I don't know how it happened. Like it just, I have a quarantine program. I have like a pretty clear method to the way I do things. And I've definitely I've had stuff like that happen before, but it's been a very long time. It's been, I don't know, 10 years or something since the last time I had to really make some kind of big haul. And in this case, it wasn't even that big of a deal. Like I found it on just a couple of animals. And then I just went through, treated everybody, cleaned everything, just did the whole run through, which is a huge pain in the ass. Yeah. You're telling me. But it's one of those things where it's like, it happens, like these kind of things, they occasionally happen to people. And I think most people don't talk about it. Most people just kind of want to they're like never going to talk. They're never going to tell anybody that it's a thing that it happens, because it could look bad it could like reflect poorly on you. But I don't give a shit. I know for a fact that happens to everyone. There is no such thing as a pristine, perfect, never had a problem facility, space, operation. That's not how it works with living creatures, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, this is just a topic. I mean, it's probably, for me, it's a little cathartic just to kind of talk about it and get it out. So this is like a little bit of a therapy session. But before I say too much more, I want to give you a chance to kind of like vent about the power outage stuff that just happened with you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so as I've shared on the podcast before, and obviously in private correspondence with you, I've been in the process of kind of moving and this ongoing thing of my partner and I bought land last year. And for the last, year, I've been basically commuting to take care of my reptiles while building out some sheds here on our land that I could move the animals into. And I just recently, within the past 2 weeks, was able to move all the animals over. Finally, the interiors of the sheds are finished. And, it's been a huge process. And of course, throughout the process, I've been thinking a lot about, contingency plans, emergency protocol, all of that, because, where I live, there's very high wildfire risk. That's obviously a major issue in most of the Western states, in California especially. And on top of that, there's pretty extreme heat here in the summer. The winters are typically mild, especially in comparison to like where you are. Although this past winter, we had a pretty unusual amount of snow here. We had about a foot of snow, which has literally never happened in recorded history here. This last winter, it's our first winter here. So, but regularly, like this week, it's been above 100 every single day and up to 110, in the past 7 days here. And especially when there's any sort of like windy weather, anything like that, it's pretty common for the utility company here, which is a big monopoly, PG&E, to basically just cut power if there's high wind and stuff like that, because they're concerned about power lines coming down and starting fires, which has been one of the major causes of wildfire here in the last 10 years.
Right.
And so obviously when you have 110-degree heat and you lose power, you lose air conditioning and all of that. And so with all of that in mind, I've been thinking a lot about, okay, what can I do in terms of just like making the systems as redundant as possible with preparedness here. And part of that is like the actual structures themselves, insulating them as well as I can. So I insulated the interiors as well as I could. And I also have plans. The next stage on that building project is actually going to be insulating the exteriors of the sheds with a rigid foam and the roof of the shed with a rigid foam, and re-roofing and re-siding the sheds so that they're like essentially double thick insulation. To both protect from the heat and help keep that cool once from the air conditioners. I have mini splits installed in each of the buildings. When the power does go out, it'll retain some of that cool for a little while before it heats up. So on top of that, I have the other big thing is standby power, and other power systems. And so my long-term goal here is to invest in a solar system, but of course that's not an inexpensive endeavor in any way. Even with financing, it's still pretty pricey to get a solar system set up. But in the interim space, my plan is to have a transfer switch and a generator to at least be able to power the circuits that run the mini splits, the air conditioning, temperature control systems in each building, just to ensure that at least the ambient, essentially baseline temperatures are under control in the event of a power outage. So I have the generator and everything, but my next purchase is essentially a transfer switch to get that system in place, where if we do lose power, I just literally go flip a switch and those circuits are powered and running on the generator. Because in some cases, like it's initially, so I lost power at 11 p.m. And it was supposed to be restored by 3 a.m. That got pushed to 8 a.m., which got pushed to noon the following day. And ultimately, the power didn't come back on until 8 p.m. And so from about 10 a.m. to 8 p.m., temperatures were, between 90 and 105 degrees, essentially, that whole day without power. And so thankfully, all the herps, were fine in the sheds. The buildings got pretty warm, but the herps were fine. And I ended up moving my eggs in my incubator to my house. So I go around and I've temp gunned all over the place in my house, basically to find, okay, like where are the different kind of temperature zones? Mm-hmm. And it's roughly when it's 100 outside, it's roughly 80 degrees underneath my sink in my kitchen, man, on the north wall of my house. So that's where I piled all the eggs and the egg boxes. So hopefully they'll do fine through that. I think that they got a little bit warmer than they're used to, but I'm sure it's nothing beyond what they can handle. But anyway, this is all just to say that, like, similarly, I have a document as well for like preparedness in the event of like fire and like evacuation, all of that stuff. But on top of that, I think that there's so much that goes into just considering if you are building out a structure or, building out a reptile room, considering things like aspect and like, is this a room that's on the south side of the house, which for those of us here in the northern hemisphere is going to get warmer throughout the day than a room on the north side of the house, which will stay cooler throughout the day just because of the sun exposure. Things like that are good to pay attention to, and they're easy to overlook. But that's all stuff that I've been really thinking about a lot. And, thankfully, even though I don't have everything, complete here in terms of my setup, like I said, I still want to insulate the exteriors of the sheds and get my transfer switch hooked up. I had enough in place up to this point to keep all the animals safe through this outage and triple digit heat. And I feel really, fortunate that it wasn't more extreme, because that's like, for me, power outages and like on a day like this or a week like this, where every day is getting up above triple digits, is my biggest concern. That's like the nightmare scenario for me. And the other thing I think to consider in all of this is like really paying attention to what species we're keeping in the climates that we live in, because thankfully I don't have anything that can't tolerate those kinds of temperatures for at least for short periods of time. A lot of the stuff I have is happy in those kinds of temperatures all the time. But not everything. And, yesterday I would have been having a panic attack if I had a room full of Abronia. Man. Sri Lankan agamids, And so, and the reason why I don't have some of these species, which otherwise I love and I find really fascinating, is because of that. Is because I know that, like, okay, at least at this stage, I don't have the necessary systems in place to ensure that those animals will be safe all the time.
Right.
And, it's just something to keep in mind.
Dude,
go ahead.
Even Euros, like Euromastics, Chuckwallas, all the desert stuff that I have here is technically, they're all heat lovers. Right. But even here, when it gets up over 95 here, man, I have a swamp cooler that I run for starters. Yeah. But then when I have to go, be at my academy or go away or whatever it is I have to do for the day, not only is that swamp cooler on, but I go through the baby room and I cut a ton of heat lamps. I just cut heat lamps.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'll turn 50 to 75% of them off for the day. Yeah. And just run the UV lights and then a handful of the heat bulbs in the space, because they just it does not have to get there. It's not worth it because the risk is too great. If that swamp cooler cuts for whatever reason, then it's going to bake in this room. And even a Euromastix, a desert loving heat specialist, is not going to be able to efficiently escape that heat. And it's really, really dangerous. So cutting the heat lamps means that, okay, maybe they're not going to have like a perfect basking zone for 3-4 hours, but they're going to have an ambient temperature of 95 degrees inside the space, and they're going to be happy as clams. The babies don't care. They still come out, they still eat, they still rip, they still shit, they do their whole thing, Oh yeah. And it's much, 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 much safer. And so it's something that I think about here all the time, even when we're talking about the specialists, right? It's such a thing to have to keep in the back of your mind. And I mean, I think this also probably plays in some way to when we talk about chaos, right? Like Ron we're on St. Pierre and some of all of our other friends, and we all talk about it all the time. Don't hamstring yourself by buying into this idea. This is a totally different thing, but we've all had this experience where someone says, "Oh, my Euromastix, my bearded dragon, my leopard gecko, whatever." Well, at nighttime, what's he supposed to do for heat at night? He doesn't need heat at night. He doesn't need it, right? Like as long as your house doesn't drop below 50 degrees, the animal's going to be just fine. Like they're just going to live. They're going to be, and most of them would probably tolerate much colder temperatures than that, and they'd be just fine. They'd move on. Totally. They wouldn't even blink. They'd just be like, "Cool, I'm Wim Hofing it, bro. Like I can, they're fine." Yeah. But the opposite is true too. I've had people when they say, "What do you do for heat in the summer?" I say, "Just cut the heat lamps. Like just turn off the heat lamps." And they're like, "What? But how's he going to do all the things he needs to do?" It's like, dude, I'm not telling you to never have the heat lamp on. I'm saying that if you turn, if they have basking lights from 8 a.m. until 2 p.m, and then you cut those heat lamps, it's fine. They're going to be fine. You could give them a whole week of nothing but the UV light running, and they're going to be totally fine, because these are animals that are not just resilient, but you're giving them some kind of chaos. So like you can kind of balance the desire to keep the temperature manageable in the space, save a little bit of money on power, with the fact that your animals are also probably going to get a little bit of psychological benefit from not having everything perfect and up and running. I mean, I don't remember who it was. I'm going to imagine it was one of our guests, and also probably you were telling me about this too, but I can't quite remember. Mm-hmm. We were talking about like the potential fallout from like our animals were not designed to be at peak operating metabolic rate all the time, constantly, forever.
Oh, totally.
Right. Yeah. And so many of the conditions that under which we keep them keeps them constantly running, like revving the engine over and over and over and over. And which is why we know that, you got to let them go through their winter cool down, hibernation, brumation, whatever the fuck, any of that. You've got to let them do it. So that way, you're like doing an oil change on the car. You're like, okay, I'm just going to let them.
Yeah. It actually influences their lifespan. It's like it shortens the lifespan of an animal if you keep it at literally like, optimal, quote unquote, optimal metabolic function 100% of the time. I mean, it shortens the lifespan of a human being. If you don't, it's like why it's beneficial, to do intermittent fasting here and there, and actually let your body shift into a different state, shift into ketosis. And that has a lot of benefits to our well-being. And I think the same thing kind of applies to our animals. And I think this also leads into another aspect of this kind of conversation around energy. And you already kind of alluded to it, but just consumption in general. and I think that this is something that, in our lifetimes is only going to become more and more complicated and fraught, because obviously we have rising energy costs. It's becoming more and more costly to produce energy. Fossil fuels are a finite resource, and they're becoming more expensive. And we haven't yet made the transition to more renewable sources of energy in most of the Western world. And yet our energy demand is increasing all the time as the population grows, obviously. And so, I think about this a lot in terms of just like, I try to be a pretty conscientious consumer, which is even the term itself disgusts me on some level. But and in many ways, I think that like my reptile keeping, herpetoculture is probably like it's the most incongruent part of my life in that respect, in terms of just like how much I'm using, because it does require a lot of energy and it's costly in that regard. And some things that I've been experimenting with, both for my benefit in terms of costs, in terms of my energy consumption, but also I think it's beneficial to the animals, is for one, I'm experimenting with 1 day a week cutting the heat lights. Yeah. So there's just a heat light fast for 1 day of the week. Yeah. Just as in nature, they're not going to have access to, again, like you said, optimal temperatures, optimal metabolic conditions every single day. And so I think that there's a benefit to doing that. The other thing that I'm doing, I'm experimenting with, is with my halogens that I provide for heat for all my animals. All of my animals have overhead heating and lighting. So they have halogens, LEDs, and UV on all of my setups. I'm experimenting with the halogens, doing, instead of one long period every day that the halogens are on, I'm kicking it into 2 phases, 2 shorter windows of time per day. So I have a morning, the halogens ramp up, they simulate a sunrise to peak power, and they stay at that peak power for a few hours. The animals can have their morning bask, and then they ramp down and they turn off, and the halogens are off for, let's say 3 hours or 4 hours. And then they ramp back up for another 3 hours. And so it's this biphasic cycle where, the animals can achieve that optimal basking in the morning and the kind of afternoon, which is also, that tends to mirror a lot of my field observations of herps, is that they're through the middle of the day at the peak temperatures, they're often hunkered down. It's often too hot, especially where I am. Obviously this can vary widely depending on your location and the conditions, but they're often hunkered down in the peak of the day, but very active in the morning and the afternoon into the evening. So I'm experimenting with that as well, as another factor of chaos in the mix. And so far, so good. This has been kind of a recent, adaptation that I've made, but I haven't seen any negative feedback from that so far with the animals. It seems to be working well.
See, yeah, no, totally. And the same thing, I'll do something very, very similar here, because, you see a lot of these animals, whether it's the Euros, whether it's the sandfish, whether it's the chuckwallas, whether it's my San Esteban iguana, there comes a time of day where they're like, I'm not even bothered. I'm not coming out. I'm not even out. The sandfish go under the sand and burrow. They do their thing. And I think this is a great example of where theoretically what am I trying to say here? The whole movement of giving animals as many freedoms and as many options as possible. And making sure that you're always giving them the option for something. This is where this brushes up against that as a concept, because it's like, okay, I might say they're not out. The animals aren't even utilizing the heat source. I'm pulling the heat lights. I'm going to turn the heat lights off for a few hours. Well, but I'm supposed to make sure this animal has the opportunity and the freedom to bask and exhibit as many natural behaviors as possible. It's like, well, this is insufficient in my mind. This is not like, this is a very minor example, but it's, in my mind, it's an example no less of like, this is a perfect point to discuss that in some way, and obviously I don't think that any of the folks who are suggesting that we need to be able to give our animals every opportunity to do everything all the time I'm not suggesting that any of those individuals would balk at the idea of shutting off the heat lights for a few hours. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying it's a great example of when. Another good example was, hearkening back to that hilarious meme that Connor made of Eric Haycraft, of that scaring the shit out of all of his lizards with that burr. Which, by the way, is the best meme in the history of the universe. Shout out to Connor.
Yeah, so good.
But that's a great example of like, in theory, that's a totally negative stimuli. That's like, oh my God, fuck, bird, bail, freak out, run, potentially slam into cage furnishings, whatever. And yet all of us can wrap our minds around why that might be a really, really good thing to provide for your animal from time to time, it's one of the things that I think about all the time here. I've said this for years, and it's something that I kind of have, maybe I haven't like fleshed out completely in terms of concept, but I really like a pissy, grumpy Euromastix. I don't like a super tame, really relaxed, ready to hang out with you. Like, I want to come out and sit on your hand. That's not my kind of Euro, And
you want some vim and vigor.
Yeah. I want those things to be a little bit spicy. You know what I mean? Like, I want those Euros to be coming out being a little bit like, hey, what you, like they're like that angry, roided up dude at 24 Hour Fitness who's like, dropping the weights, screaming and flexing in the mirror too hard. That one
that's your ideal model right there.
That one hit a little too close to home. And I mean, I know we started this about talking about contingency and emergency preparedness, and maybe we didn't, I think we did a good job of sort of talking about how it relates to our individual circumstances in our lives and stuff. But, I also feel like, something else that I wanted to talk about today was the interesting, like how this experience of making this show and talking to so many different people has enriched my perspective on herpetoculture and on what I do. And I mean, I genuinely mean it when I say every single conversation we've had, I feel like I've learned something. And I think one of the broader lessons I'm taking from all of this has been, this really interesting reminder, or not reminder, but like this really interesting, steady signal that tells me, dude, there are so many different ways of approaching this and so many different ways that people are engaging with herpetoculture. I mean, we always talk about all the commonalities and the through lines, like the fact that so many of us started with dinosaurs as a kid. So many of us were catching, we were the nerds in school, the nerds in class, the ones who were always doing something a little bit different and kind of getting maybe picked on a little bit for it. Some of us not, the fact, what is it about the reptile industry? There's reptile and amphibian hobby that seems to bring in so many like semi-shady individuals from time to time, right? Like, all of these weird commonalities, but I think it's also extra interesting to think about all the fucking insane differences between us, like how unique every single person we've spoken to is. And all the ways in which their experience was so different from mine, from yours, the ways that we came to similar conclusions for different reasons, and then simultaneously the way we've come to the same conclusions for totally different reasons. Oh, wait, did I do that backwards? I meant, so the fact that some of us have...
No, I follow you.
Okay. So, just making sure. Just for my own sake, the way that some of us have come to the same conclusion for different reasons, and then the way some of us have taken the same rationale and ended up at a totally different conclusion, the same stimuli, but yielded a different conclusion, And I think that's, I think that gives like a real vibrancy to this world and to what we do, and a real, a richness in the experience. And then one more thing too, before I slow my ramble down, is it's also really cool. I feel like we owe a really great debt to sort of like the advent of the internet and social media. Like, as much as I hate social media, like with a fiery passion, the reality is I'm not sure we'd have the same sort of growth and development and change in our industry right now if it wasn't for the advent of the internet and social media. And the fact that you and I can connect with Camille over in the Netherlands and have a whole conversation with him about uromastics and be like, how the hell do you do this shit, man? You know, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, totally, man. I mean, I don't know, kind of like, well, first, like, to respond to what you had said before that,
sure,
kind of shifted there, which is like regarding the potential like drawback to like what I'm describing of this, like, lack of a basking day and this kind of biphasic basking cycle is the deprivation of choice. It's like, there's like, you're reducing a little bit of choice there. And I think that that's true. And like, typically, that's something I think about a lot with my herps is choice. Like, most of the interaction I have with them, and unless I absolutely need to, is choice based. Like, I'm not, taking stuff out and holding it if it doesn't want to be held, stuff like that. But I think that, like, and this ties back to what you're speaking to, is that so much of what has been affirmed for me in our conversations on this podcast is just like embracing complexity as a revitalizing force, like chaos, complexity as, Ron would say chaos. I might say complexity. I think that we're talking about basically the same thing, and I think that, just for me personally, like, that's something in my life that I feel is like an affirmation that I'm on the right path, is if I'm showing enough resilience in myself, in the structure of my life, to embrace more and more complexity, and to be more and more adaptable and malleable to change. And I think that that's just an important thing to cultivate. And it's not exactly, something that we directly inherit from the overculture that we're living in, in society. And so, I think that that's, like, for me, that is a real indicator that, like, we're on the right track, with this podcast, that we're continuing to have conversations that are generating more complexity and making us think more and making us question more what we're doing. I'm grateful to have guests that challenge my perspective on things regularly, you know, and that we can have like this generative discourse with people that we look up to and admire within this field and this discipline that we love so much. And I just want that to continue. I want to continue to view herpetoculture more and more as just this kind of like ultimately unknowable, unquantifiable endeavor, which it is.
Yeah.
It's like there is just so much at play. And I think that, again, that in a lot of ways that speaks to just the actual true state of the universe, the true state of nature is that there are very few black and whites and hard and fast rules all the time.
Right.
And so it's a good thing when the conversations that we're having and the thoughts that we're thinking are reminding us of that, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I couldn't agree more with that, man. I really couldn't. Well, listen, I think, given this is one of our we've only done maybe 2 other solo shows other than this one.
Yep. Yeah. Well, first episode and one other. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Oh yeah, that's right. So 2 others. So this would be our 3rd solo show. And I think, normally we could probably go on at great length from here. But I think it might be worth.
But nobody wants to hear that.
Yeah, they're kind of sick of it. They're kind of tired of hearing you and me, hearing my bullshit, just rambling on about. I don't really know if that's the right way to do it, but I think given that we have a one mild scheduling constraint on our time this morning, and I think I'm actually quite satisfied with the track that conversation took, and I think.
Me too, man.
So I think maybe now's the time to kind of call it. Before we sign off, I also just want to say that I appreciate all of the time and effort that you put into this. I really appreciate.
Thanks, man.
Anybody who even bothers to spend time listening to us ramble on about lizards and snakes and frogs and bullshit. And I think we should set a goal for ourselves here at this particular solo show. I think we need to make an effort to get on the next handful of guests that we should reach out to try to bring onto the show should be amphibian specialists.
Yes.
I don't think we've had enough amphibian specialists on here. So you good with that?
That's true. And I'm so good with that. And there's a few people that immediately spring to mind already. So let's do it.
Okay, good. Yeah. Hell yeah. Cool. Let's do it. So this is episode 47. So we got to plan something nice and fancy for the 50.
Okay. I love it. Done deal. Right. And I want to just echo the gratitude too, just the gratitude for you. This is like such an awesome collaboration and partnership that we have here. And I appreciate you a lot. And, and appreciate all of our listeners and supporters, those who have subscribed on Patreon, those who just like reach out and say, hey, enjoy this episode, or hey, this episode made me think this, that kind of engagement is always welcome. It's always appreciated. And so, just thanks for the encouragement to keep doing this, and may it continue in a good way.
Hell yeah. Freaking yeah.
All right. Thanks everybody. With that, I'm going to hit the button.
Thanks y'all.